So let me just introduce the two panelists we have here today. So I'm delighted to have with me Dr. Samir Al-Ansari, who is the CEO of RAC ICC, and Sunita Singh Dalal, who is of counsel with Stephenson Harwood. So what we would like to do with this seminar is I'm gonna pose a few questions to Dr. Samir and Sunita for about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll open it for questions. So if you look at the bottom of your screen in the middle, there'll be a Q&A box. So if you type in your questions there, then I can see them come up, and then I will post those and ask those directly to Sunita and Dr. Samir at the end of it. And just to let you know, we are beaming this live on RAC ICC's YouTube channel, and it is being recorded as well. So if you have to drop out at any stage, then obviously you can come back in and watch it on our YouTube channel. So let me get straight into it there. So I'm going to start off by asking yourself, Sunita, and I'm going to unmute you now so you can talk. So Sunita, why should families be thinking about, family governance structures in this current environment with COVID, etc.?
Thanks, Gary, and good morning to everybody, and thank you for joining us. It's rather interesting because as a professional advisor, I'm often stonewalled by clients when I try and approach subjects sometimes such as family governance, taking care of your businesses, protecting your assets, and just generally getting some good professional wealth management advice, being taken notice of. It's very unfortunate, the situation that we're all in. It's very unsettling. But if anything, it is actually a massive global wake-up call, not just for family-run businesses, but professionally run businesses as well. And also for families with large portfolios of assets, be they global or domestic here in the GCC. It's taught us one thing, and that is that it's very important for the continuity of our businesses and to protect the wealth that maybe is generations old and our ancestors have passed it on to us. It's tremendously important to depersonalize that. And it's a depersonalization means obviously taking it out of personal names. So for example, in families, unfortunately, if one person on a board which consists of all the family members is suddenly incapacitated or taken ill, or in the current situation is in quarantine, it actually puts a complete halt to the running of the business. I also find at this point in time, and especially here in the GCC, as we are in the holy month of Ramadan, that there really is now no excuse for us to say we don't have time. I often find families say, we just don't have time, Sunita, we're too busy, we have to do this, now we're on to the next project. That doesn't hold fast anymore. I would really urge you and the professional advisors who are listening to this to reach out proactively to your clients and to respectfully say to them, we have time. That's one luxury that now we do have. And it's important to now start looking at how we depersonalize assets, put them into robust protective structures. So God forbid if something happens to anyone within the family, our assets, our business, our wealth, and our loved ones are protected.
Thank you, Sunita. Dr. Samir, I mean, with your past experience, etc. Sorry, I was trying to unmute you. There you go. Okay, thank you, Dr. Samir. With your past experience, obviously having worked with many families over the years as well, it's a common thing, as Sunita mentioned, about now is not the time. Obviously, if it's not now, when will it ever be? I mean, what's your comment around, why governance structures in particular should be looked at now?
Sure. Thank you, Gary. Good morning, Sunita. Good morning, everyone. Yes, I could not agree more with what Sunita said. Having been in this region for over 30 years and worked with so many families, it's often been, frankly, sometimes an unbelievable discussion as to why these mega families have not taken the necessary steps to put the right structures in place. And yes, very often it's okay, Samir, we have time, we will get to it at some point. So I guess the blessing in disguise in what we're going through today is it has really made everybody take this seriously. And it's frankly the responsible thing to do. It's just basic as that. It's the responsible thing to do. And those who don't do it are really being irresponsible. But they've got to implement different structures because at the end of the day, succession is very, very, very important. The separation of company and family governance is very, very important. And the example that Sunita gave is a perfect example of what could go wrong and what issues could arise if there isn't this proper separation and succession planning and governance, whether it's family constitutions or it's corporate governance at the corporate level with non-executive board members that can add value in many ways to these boards, and frankly, the best executives that money can buy, because at the end of the day, succession, continuity, the continuity of the business are very, very important things. And one of the things that I experienced in these last 20, 30 years is the devastation that can happen if the structures have not been put in place before something catastrophic happens. And the destruction of wealth, the disputes that arise, the problems that arise within the various family members, the decisions that then get taken because of personal agendas, let's say, rather than pure business agendas that were put in place when people had time to think about those agendas, and then the wealth destruction that happened because, oh, we've decided we will give that business to that brother and that business to this brother and that business to that cousin and so on and so forth. So it is really, really, really important. It's the responsible thing to do. And if there's one positive about what we're going through today is that it is pushing people in that direction.
Thank you, Dr. Samir. I'd just like to delve into that a little bit more detail, Sunita, and, talking about governance structures, going into the next level down, and it really around professional guidance and advice, because there are many different ways to deal with wealth, etc., which Dr. Samir has referred to. And I was reading a report by the Harvard Business Review that they've just done some research in the last couple of weeks. And they've identified that 28% of families, their internal family relationship has deteriorated because of what's going on at the moment around discussions like this. I mean, so how important is it to know how to manage your wealth within a family?
I was going to say, Gary, you're a brave man for muting me. It is tremendously important. And frankly, the study that you refer to by Harvard, unfortunately, doesn't surprise me. Because as I said, we do have the luxury of time. And unfortunately, what happens is when we are put together, perhaps not by choice, it is not the ideal situation for the most constructive and progressive discussions. And again, as professional advisors, that it should be our job to generate the right kind of discussion and to get the family focused on non-emotive decisions, but more long-term decisions that affect succession, decisions that are objective and decisions that are in the best interest of, yes, on one hand, the family, and yes, on the other hand, most importantly, the business. We spend a lot of time, and we have done this last year as well, talking about the next generation and continuity of business and succession. I often find clients are sometimes stuck between emotive decisions of feeling compelled to hand over the reins of the business and governance of the business to the next generation, regardless of whether they're capable or not. And most importantly, regardless of whether they're interested in the business or not. So these are all discussions that are very, very important for us to have constructively in a healthy environment. Recently, my colleagues and I have spent a lot of time preparing cross-border questionnaires that allow families to actually, if you like, script and direct that discussion. And we've broken family constitutions and succession and continuity of business down into appetizable kind of chunk-sized discussions that families can actually sit down once or twice a week, is my advice at this current time, no more than twice a week, to actually start a discussion, keep it to short and sweet like we're doing now with, say, 3 or 4 points. Have a chat, reflect upon it, and then regroup, and then come to a healthy, balanced decision that everyone is happy about. So that may well be diversification, that may well be ring fencing assets, that may well be, in the current situation, looking at protective measures, looking at your financing options that are in place, looking at restructuring options, or like we said, depersonalizing and splitting assets between personal assets, between family assets, between long-term assets, between continuity of business, ensuring asset protective structures. There's the family constitution discussion is actually, I would say, something that we could do and focus on separately. But if anything, today, for today's purposes, I would say break it down into constructive, order of priority type, appetizable conversations.
Great, thank you, Sunita. Just taking that across to you, Dr. Samir, and as Sunita sort of said quite interestingly, it's the sort of separation and compartmentalizing the wealth within a family, whether that's the business and private wealth, etc. I mean, that element of managing that wealth, you know, what's your view in terms of how families can segment that? And I guess sort of what are the type of formal governance systems that can be implemented by a family?
Yeah, I will come to that, Gary, but I first wanted to add to what Sunita was saying that, and I fully agree with everything that Sunita has said. I just want to add that this discussion is important because it's not just about big family groups and big family conglomerates. It's important for all of us, frankly, and it's important because it's 2 areas that I wanted to focus on. One is all to do with taking care of your family and frankly, taking the worry out of it. We're all sitting at home, stuck and thinking, what happens if something really happens to me? What happens if I pass away? What happens if a senior member of my wider family passes away? What happens to their assets? What taxes would they have to pay? You know, I'm a Muslim, so I have to think about other things too. And there are many, of course, in this region that are, and many that are not, and also have solutions. So there is that side of it, and this is very important. It's not just about the $5-20 billion groups. It's frankly about all of us, and there are solutions for all of us. So that's one. The other is to make sure that the structures that are put in place provide what we want at the end of the day. So preserve the wealth, make sure the assets are passed on or our wishes are adhered to. Leaving a legacy and not being left in limbo, and then somebody else has to step in and frankly do whatever they want because there was no menu or instructions to act and so on. So I think it's a very, very important discussion and a very important subject for all of us, not just massive groups. Everybody has to think about this, and there are solutions out there, and we can talk about them now, or I'll leave it to the next couple of questions.
I think it's worth just sort of leading us into that discussion now, Samira, in terms of what the sort of solutions are.
Sure. So when you talk about solutions, again, there are many solutions that one can look at, and I guess it depends on the size and complexity of the group and the family and mix of assets and wealth and so on. But it can be as simple as creating a company and putting some assets under it and putting various shareholders at that company level. It could be creating a trust, and it could be creating a foundation and so on. Of course, in this part of the world, trusts are used, but are not often the favorite option, because with a trust, you have to have trustees. You literally have to trust the trustees to do what you want. You're passing on the decision-making to those trustees, etc., etc. It kind of goes against the culture of this part of the world. And you know, trust took a long time to become a nice flavor for many people. So foundations is a great solution. And as our listeners would know, we launched foundations earlier this year, and foundations, achieve many of the objectives that we talked about earlier. So separation of the legal from the person, the succession and passing on of the assets, the wealth preservation, the estate planning, many of the advantages that every one of us is looking for in a very cost-effective structure where you don't lose control. We can talk about foundations in a lot of detail, and we can come back depending on the questions that you're receiving, Gary, but I'll stop there and give Sunita a chance to add to that.
Yes, Sunita, I guess sort of just following that through, as Dr. Samir mentioned, Stephenson Harwood are an international law firm. Within RAK ICC, we have clients from all over the world. So with your experience here in the UAE, I mean, what sort of, systems and solutions do you find most popular to be utilized here in the UAE?
I think what's very important at the outset is to understand, just as Dr. Samir said, is that there are robust structures that are available that are tried and tested and have been used in more international jurisdictions such as the Channel Islands, Jersey, Guernsey, Liechtenstein, etc., that we know as the foundation structure. So introducing it here has worked beautifully because it now allows both Muslim and non-Muslim ownership of assets to move into a structure and depersonalize it. And that's something up till now that I think a lot of clients have faced in the region and have felt very challenged by because of course, the obvious implications of Sharia law. The foundation structure works very, very well. For example, the governance of the foundation structure. So once you've transferred your assets into a structure and you've depersonalized those assets, you still have control. And that's very different to the example that Dr. Samir was talking about in relation to the trust. You're absolutely right. Clients in Asia, in the Middle East, we do have an issue with letting go of control and ownership. By moving your assets into a foundation structure doesn't mean to say that you have lost control and governance of those assets. So we have what is known in the foundation as a council and a council of members. And the council of members is what is used to govern and control and take the day-to-day business decisions and personal family decisions. And that council of members, very interestingly, is almost identical to, in our culture, we have always within the family, generally, historically, a senior council consisting of the senior members of the family. What's changed now, and what I encourage people to do, is to have a balanced council. A balanced council will comprise of professional advisors like ourselves. A balanced council will comprise of perhaps some of the family elders. But most importantly, a balanced council also comprises of the next generation. And the next generation can take part and start being inculcated and being groomed to take over the business. We can put in measures that perhaps control their decision-making ability so that we're protecting them from making perhaps rash or immature or non-reflective, non-balanced decisions. The foundation structure works very, very beautifully because it is recognized, it has depersonalized, it is very tax efficient. The structure that you have in place, the RAC Foundation, is extremely cost effective. Most importantly, it doesn't take a long time to put into place. Also, it's very discreet, and discretion is something that's very important for our culture as well. We want to be seen to be discreet. At the same time, we want to continue with the traditions that we have in terms of philanthropy and doing good charitable functions. And the foundation actually encapsulates everything without telling everyone what our true intentions are. And that is because the core documentation that govern and sit behind, i.e. the bylaws of the foundation, are a private document, similar to a shareholders agreement that we have. And if these have been prepared properly by professional advisors, they'll never ever come into the public domain. It's a personal document that is updated. It continually evolves, and that's what goes back to what we were talking about in terms of family governance. It allows families to revisit those documents from time to time, periodically, as they should, to update them, to add new beneficiaries, to amend and evolve with the times as we require. So the foundation structure works very, very well, and most importantly, it is, as I said, it's recognized by a lot of the jurisdictions. For example, if there are assets that are immovable assets, if there are assets that are properties are capable of being put into the foundations, and that ownership transfer is recognized. If it is structured in a certain way, it also reduces the potential tax liability that arises when you make a regular transfer of property. So there are many, many benefits of using the foundation structure if done properly.
Thanks, Sunita. I've had a number of questions through, but before I go into those, I just wanted to quickly go into that foundations again a little bit more. I mean, we've been delighted at the response and the number of foundations that we've opened in RAC ICC. And I guess sort of just two questions from your experience. I mean, you've touched on real estate. I mean, what sort of assets are people putting into foundations? And are you finding your clients across the GCC in Saudi and Oman and Kuwait, etc., also utilizing UAE foundations?
Yes, the pickup, as I said, for various reasons, and to be very simplistic about it, it is a user-friendly solution. So the interest in terms of asset classes has been tremendous, because the foundation almost acts as a holding structure at the top of the organizational structure chart, if you like. It doesn't interrupt the businesses that are operating underneath that structure at all, if done properly. So you could actually, within the foundation structure, do two things at once. You can do what Dr. Samir said earlier on, which is segregate your portfolio now and put in place different silos under the foundation to distinguish the truly personal family-owned assets, and that could even branch out into allowing certain, if we're talking about family businesses, if it was my children, for example, I could further segregate between my sons and my daughters, etc., and put structures in place under the foundation. At the same time, it allows us to diversify and segregate our business assets, and to allow for structures under the foundation for business assets. Or for example, if I was looking at a portfolio of businesses in the GCC and then wanting to expand into Africa, or wanting to diversify further into Europe, taking advantage of the tax benefits that we have here in this jurisdiction, I could further segregate that, all while sitting under the kind of umbrella of the foundation as such. Just as happens in all other well-known international jurisdictions where foundations are used very, very effectively. So it is really a robust, holistic solution that works very well.
That's great. Thank you very much, Sunita. I'm just going to go into a few questions now, because I'm just conscious of time. And Dr. Samir, this one's a specific one for you. How is a RAC ICC structure better than a structure available in Mauritius?
In Mauritius?
Yes.
I would be the wrong person to ask about Mauritius structures, I'm afraid.
Okay.
How does it compare to a DIFC or an ADGM? I could answer. We're all very similar, but we've got the advantage of the privacy clauses that Sunita mentioned. Sunita, are you an expert on Mauritius?
Unfortunately not.
We will get back to the whoever asked the question. We will get back to them by email.
That was an anonymous question, so if you did send that through, then please get in contact with us, and then obviously we can look into that in a little bit more detail for you. Okay.
I mean, the only thing I would add to that is, of course, if you set up the structure here, it is a UAE structure, and therefore all of the advantages that the UAE provides from a tax legislation, double taxation treaties, etc. Point of view. But Otherwise, I doubt if there are many differences.
And from a legal perspective, the only thing I would add to that, and I never opine in relation to jurisdictions where we're not experts on, but from a UAE perspective, again, it's very important to understand what is your underlying asset portfolio, because each asset will have certain foreign ownership restrictions possibly attached to it. So therefore, you may fall into prohibitive restrictions in terms of foreign ownership. And there may be certain asset classes that are not beneficial to be owned by foreign owners. And there may well be double taxation implications that apply negatively. So in fact, in some ways, that question is a blessing because it does highlight the need that you must get proper professional advice. And one advisor certainly cannot provide you the entire global holistic. We have to work with appropriate advisors per jurisdiction and per speciality.
The other point to highlight, and you could say that is an advantage, is that our foundation laws are subject to common law courts, and that is the use of the ADGM and the DIFC courts, which many people find extremely advantageous.
Thank you both. There's another question that's come through that's sort of linked to RAC Foundations, and I guess is more relevant for you to answer, I guess, Sunita, as an independent, so we're not doing a RAC sales job here. A question's come through saying, are you seeing an increase in the use of RAC foundations as opposed to foundations in other offshore jurisdictions? And are there any pros or cons for using RAC compared to elsewhere?
The short answer to that is yes, there is definitely an increase, and the increase I see is as a result of, for example, some of the corporate service providers that are expressing an interest in wanting to know more. Again, what's very important for a lot of people to understand is that there are ownership restrictions, and that's why it is absolutely fantastic that we now have domestic solutions available in the UAE, in RAC, for example, where we can now structure our GCC portfolios under these jurisdictions using the foundation structure. For example, to highlight what I mean practically, is up till now, if a GCC family or any family had assets in the GCC and assets outside, for example, in Europe, in America, in Canada, wherever they may be, up till now, you probably only had the luxury of protecting those assets that were outside of the GCC because we didn't have the foundation solution available. So yes, I have seen an absolute increase, and that is because finally families now understand and are beginning to understand that there are domestic solutions available. And if you look further within the portfolios, you will find the bulk of the wealth is actually here in the GCC. So it is tremendously beneficial that finally we now have the ability to advise families in relation to that bulk and that crux of wealth here, and are able to protect it for them from a long-term succession perspective.
I think also the fact that they now do have an alternative to trusts, which they did not want to do, is a big, big plus. Having experienced personally trusts and foundations, you know, the complex structure that you mentioned before, Sunita, if that was to be put under a trust, and if you were to make any changes to that trust over the years, it is complex, it is expensive, it's cumbersome, it will drive you nuts. Whereas under a foundation, it's cost effective and much easier to achieve.
And just following on from that, we've had a few more questions around foundations, and you referred to European clients just now, Sunita. So two parts to this question. How would a European be advantaged by a UAE foundation? And just to confirm whether a foundation can own Dubai and Abu Dhabi located real estate.
If a European or an expat, i.e. a non-GCC owner, had a portfolio of assets here within the region, the foundation is a robust and recognizable structure that allows us to transfer the ownership from those individuals or from the companies into the foundation structure. The land that you refer to, for example, so property assets, those also work very well and compatible with the transfer of ownership into a foundation structure. And what I would say is that on a case-by-case basis, we would look at the underlying portfolio and make sure before we put in very expensive structures or we go into complex restructuring measures, that we make sure at the outset that whatever we do have and we're looking at transferring into a foundation, that it does truly work. I often find clients sometimes, unfortunately, have either tried to do things themselves or they haven't taken the right kind of advice, and therefore they've fallen upon stumbling blocks and hurdles whereby property assets aren't allowed to be transferred into a foundation. The respective land departments now do recognize foundations, but again, one size does not fit all. And I would say if you were acting prudently, it is very important to take each portfolio on a case-by-case basis to make sure that what we are trying to achieve is indeed achievable. I personally have worked, and my team have worked at great lengths in conjunction with some of the intermediaries and the service providers with the land departments on a case-by-case basis. And I find that that works very well because it is a whole new regime for all of us. And as we know in the Middle East, in the beginning, there will always be stumbling blocks. The secret is not to give up. The secret is not to say, yes, definitely we can do all of this, but the secret is to tread carefully and cautiously and to work with the relevant regulatory authorities in conjunction with each other to iron out the kinks and truly make it a robust environment for all of us to work together with.
That, if I may add, Gary, that was also the case with wills when they were first introduced, and now wills work very well. And I would be remiss not to mention that RAC ICC also registers DIFC wills. So, you know, solutions are there for, you know, the ultra rich and the not so rich. These are solutions that are very important, especially in the current environment.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Dr. Samir. And you preempted me there because that was one of the last questions that came through around RAC ICC and wills. So thank you for that. I'm just conscious of time that we have overrun. And I apologize, there have been many questions that have come through that we just haven't had the time to answer. By all means, contact us directly or to Sunita at Stephenson Harwood if you want to follow through with those, because a lot of them are anonymous, so I can't see, obviously I'm not in a position to reply to you. So, but once again, thank you very much for attending, and special thanks to Dr. Samir and Sunita as well for taking the time out to join us. As I mentioned, this is the first series of webinars that we're going to do, so we'll let you know the details of the next one. But in the meantime, once again, thank you very much for your time, and please everybody keep safe. Thank you.
Thank you.